Hello from Jonathan and from me. Welcome to the programme.
First tonight, the community nurse clamped while visiting a patient and the 5-hour standoff that then followed.
Hannah Bannock had parked her car, as she's done many times before, at some private flats in Clacton in Essex while she made a home visit. But when she came out, the clampers had struck.
Well, she refused to pay up and the clampers refused to give up. The standoff that followed came as the government announced plans to outlaw clamping on private property.
Tom Barton was the only television reporter at the scene, and you're about to see how events unfolded.
She should have been with her patient for 20 minutes. 3.5 hours later, Hannah Bannock was still there. It was a standoff. On one side, the community nurse who'd been on her rounds in Clacton.
The NHS should pay and then they appeal against it, but I don't know.
On the other, the security firm who'd clamped her car in the 15 minutes she'd been parked outside her patient's flat.
One of the little girls that lives in the flat with her grandparents knocked on the door and said, "You've got somebody clamping your car." I, of course, came running down here and they just clamped it. I was literally on there for about 15 minutes and he said, "I'm sorry, you have to ring the number that's on your car. There's nothing to do with me now." I've had to pass on another 6 visits. A lot of them need medication.
This has developed into something of a stalemate. You've been here already for 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours? 4 or 5 hours?
4 hours. Yeah, 4 hours now.
This has obviously developed into something of a stalemate. 4 hours you've been here. Are you going to move? Would you pay the money at all, or are you just not going to pay?
Well, I'm not going to pay, no.
Half an hour later, the police arrived.
At the end of the day, it's obviously a nurse. What we do now, don't we?
They were unable to intervene and the stalemate continued. Then, 4 hours after the standoff began, a development. The security firm drove off, with the clamp still attached firmly to Hannah's car.
What do you make of the fact they've just driven off and left you here with the clamp on your car?
I'm actually a bit worried now because I actually don't know what to do now because I'm stuck here without, not being able to move my car.
Hannah couldn't leave. If the clampers returned, they'd tow her car away. As she prepared to settle in for the night, suddenly they came back and, without a word of explanation, removed the clamp. It seems Hannah had won this battle, and today the government announced that the motorists' war on clampers has also come to an end.
The reason we're going to an outright ban rather than regulation is because successive governments have tried, Lord knows they have tried, to bring this industry under control.
I met up again with Hannah this morning and she told me she was delighted with the news.
Absolutely elated. I mean, I'm sure what happened yesterday, hadn't made all that happen in the first place, but it's just nice that my story has come to light, and these companies that aren't governed by anybody now are going to be, it's going to be illegal for them to do things, do this to all these people.
All of our attempts to talk to South East Clamping Limited had failed. They'd refused to speak to me in the car park yesterday, and when I phoned them up and said I was from ITV News, they hung up. So today I paid them a visit at what appears to be their base in South Ockenden, Essex, to give them a chance to put their side of the story.
No comment. Clearly doesn't want to talk to us. There we go.
The announcement that outfits like this will no longer be allowed to clamp cars on private land could mean the end for much of their business. That is music to the ears of Hannah and thousands of motorists like her. Tom Barton, Anglia News in South Ockenden, Essex.
At least we've got a smiling face at the end of that. And we've got extended footage of that standoff on our website, itv.com/Anglia.
Yeah, stay calm while you're watching it. But what are the rules then surrounding clamping? Well, as things stand, if someone wants to work clamping vehicles, they must hold a frontline licence from the Security Industry Authority. And managers or directors must hold a non-frontline licence.
To get a licence, clampers need 27 hours of training, criminal record checks and pay £245. This will all be stopped once the new ban becomes law, when anyone who clamps a vehicle or tows it away on private land will face, according to the Home Office, tough penalties.
And as we've said, there are now government plans to curb clampers' powers. Well, earlier I spoke to Patrick Troy, the Chief Executive of the British Parking Association, who wants to see regulation rather than an outright ban.
Well, we believe that the government should regulate clamping on private land. Unfortunately, there's no regulation at the moment, which means that the scrag end of the market, the road clamper, can carry on in an unregulated fashion, whereas what we're looking to achieve is that the operators who carry out clamping and other types of parking management are able to carry on and address the issue of enforcement and management of private land on behalf of landowners.
It sounds impressive what you're asking for, but in reality, as we've seen from the stories that we've covered, this is really about making money for companies, and it's the poor old member of the public who gets clamped that suffers.
Well, it shouldn't be about making money, it should be about managing land. That's what this is all about, and this is why we want the government to regulate clamping, because it should be a means to an end, a means of achieving management of landowners' land, their car park, for the benefit of their customers. And that's what we'd like to see, not companies making huge amounts of money out of this, but about managing land on behalf of landowners.
And what are your genuine fears if clamping is done away but nothing is put in its place?
I think the concern is that it means that landowners won't be able to properly protect their land. This is a charter. What the government has proposed today is a charter for the selfish parker. It means that those small minority of people who don't care where they park will use this legislation to park on private land at the expense of the person who owns that land, and that landowner won't be able to get rid of that vehicle, whereas at the moment, as a last resort, they can either clamp or tow it away.
OK, Patrick Troy, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time this evening.
Thank you very much.
Council cuts are something we're all getting used to hearing about. But now 2 authorities in our region have decided to save money in a rather unusual way by sharing their top man.
Yes, Terry Huggins has been Chief Executive of South Holland District Council for the last 7 years. But last week, he also took up the same post at Breckland District Council. That's more than 50 miles away in Norfolk. So, in these tough economic times, is this the way of the future? Well, Emma Baker's been looking at the details.
From the bins to the roads to the classrooms, they're all services provided by our local councils, funded by us, the taxpayer. But as that pot of money is now having to go further, how do councils save money whilst protecting frontline services? Well, this man, Terry Huggins, thinks he's part of the answer. He's just taken up the role of Chief Executive at Breckland District Council in Norfolk, while staying in the same role some 50 miles away at South Holland District Council in Lincolnshire. The 2 councils say it's a great way of saving money. But what do the people of Thetford think?
How can you be down this end of the country and also up almost towards Manchester direction, in a sense, basically running the same thing? So no, I wouldn't think it would actually work out at the end of the day.
I mean, probably a good idea. Probably. It might work out a bit cheaper.
He's splitting his time and he's not concentrating on the area that he's here. He should be here, doing his job in this area.
I don't think he'll concentrate on the Breckland, really, if his priorities are split between us and Lincolnshire.
So not a great deal of support for the move there, but local MP Elizabeth Truss thinks sharing council resources is the way forward.
It's a much more bottom-up approach than we saw under the last government, which was forcing mergers. It's actually saying we're going to have democratic representation at a local level, but people don't care where the IT system's coming from. It's better if those things can be shared if it saves money. I think everyone would agree with that.
These 2 councils aren't the first in our region to share a chief executive. Suffolk Coastal and Waveney District Council also have the same top man, although unlike Breckland and South Holland, they do share a common border. Of course, everywhere you look, local authorities are under pressure. Norfolk County Council has just doubled the number of redundancies it expects to make, while Cambridgeshire County Council is looking at ways in which it can cut almost a third of its libraries budget. What will be under scrutiny over the next few months is the salaries of the top council posts. 4 of the most highly paid council chiefs in England are in our region, all earning over £200,000. The irony is these well-paid officials now have the jobs of delivering some of the biggest savings in a generation.
Well, it's 6:10.